Good morning. This week we're going to cover concepts related to training, and I thought that in order to cover this topic I would do a series of a few videos to kind of talk about some of my own experience and thoughts on training. This particular part of the textbook is kind of spread out a little bit. So what I'm going to try to do is focus some information specifically on training concepts, because in my experience I think it's really important to just kind of understand some of the different basic training concepts. I really am a firm believer in a basic understanding of training for coaching track and field. From what I've observed and experienced myself, that's a very, very key component of track and field coaches, cross-country coaches, really having successful programs. It really comes down to, I think, in many cases, an understanding of training, also in conjunction with the things that we've already covered. So I've seen a lot of coaches out there who I think really understand training concepts well and do a good job training their athletes, but they can't ever get any momentum in their program, and so they only have, maybe 5 to 10 athletes on their team or something of that nature. So I don't want to oversimplify it, but I do want to emphasize the fact that training is very important. And an understanding of training, I think, is key to being a good coach of track and field and cross country. I've had over 30 years of experience coaching track and field at different levels. I haven't ever been a cross country coach, so I would say my understanding of distance training definitely is not as strong as sprints, jumps, middle distance, and I'm not as comfortable with training for the throws either. But I will say that there's basic concepts that apply that really go to all those areas, and those basic concepts would be the following. First of all, training is cumulative. And what I mean by that is there's what the gurus or people who write about these types of things would call a training age. So in other words, the more experience you have training for a particular area, the better you're going to be at it. You build up better skill, you build up strength, you build up cardiovascular efficiency, you build running efficiency or throwing efficiency, or even weight training efficiency. All of those things kind of work together to give an athlete what they call a training age or a level of experience. So, for me, coaching college athletes, I have a very different view of a college freshman than I did when I coached high school, and some of that is experience too. After coaching as many years as I have a better understanding now. I think that you have to train a high school freshman much different than a high school senior, and you coach a college freshman different than a college senior also. And part of that has to do with their level of experience in training. The more training they have under their belt, the more volume, especially, and to some extent, the more intensity that they can handle. And performance in all areas of track and field really has to do with how can you train. If you can train at a certain level, you're going to be able to perform at that level. And building up that training age and that experience is a super important thing. Another really key concept is periodization, and you may have heard that term before. But really, to put it in the simplest terms that I can, periodization has to do with load and intensity and how you figure that out throughout a season. So when you look at a periodized program, what they typically talk about is training cycles, and there gets to be a lot of really technical terminology. I'm going to try to stay away from that as much as I can, but just so you know kind of where I'm coming from here, those training cycles are oftentimes broken down into what they call microcycles and macrocycles. And it's just what it sounds like. A microcycle is a smaller cycle. The macro cycle is a bigger cycle, and then the season would be like your biggest cycle. So for track and field in college, we do actually 2 seasons. So in a sense, 2 really big macro cycles, and then you have microcycles within that, which is basically your weekly training cycle. In high school, it's only 1 season, so it's just really 1 macro cycle with a number of microcycles within that. And within each of those microcycles, I've always kind of tried to break it down into like a weekly microcycle. Some people like to do a 10-day. For me, I just think the weekly works the best, especially with the rhythm of college track and field, where you basically have 1 meet at the end of every week. It's a little tougher with a high school season where you have a Monday or a Tuesday meet. You have to kind of set things up differently then. But the basic concept is within that week, you're going to have days that are higher volume, and you're going to have days that are lower volume, and then you're going to have days that are higher intensity, and you're going to have days that are lower intensity. And you try to work in your recovery within those microcycles, and recovery is very important. You can train incredibly hard, and if you don't have adequate recovery, it's all going to go to waste. So I like to say that I like to train hard and also recover hard. And that is going to give you the best results in training. Now, it is also important to understand, and I'll get a little bit more into this when I talk about specific areas, but it's also important to understand that different systems, different energy systems, results in a different recovery. So let's say on a Monday, if I'm training sprinters and the focus is like a tempo type of workout, I'm really working on probably like long sprint endurance types of things. And then on a Tuesday, I'll come back and train the athletes for acceleration. And the acceleration workout can still be a relatively hard workout, and there can be high intensity, but the energy system that it's training in the athlete is completely different. So it's like a complete rest for the systems that we trained on Monday. And as I talk about the sprint and the distance and so forth, I'll get more into those details. I'm not going to say anything more about it now. So yeah, I'm going to break this down into basically 4 different areas with a little bit of, caveats in there, but the training would be for throws, sprints, and then middle distance and distance. And mid distance and distance can kind of get thrown together. There's a lot of similarities, but really in a lot of ways, I believe the middle distance training kind of fits between sprints and distance. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get into the specific areas and talk about the training on those. So yeah, I'm going to do a video for each one of those, and you can watch them and then do some of the other things that I'll have posted for this section.